Welcome everyone to the panel discussion on homelessness and place. We have a great panel of people who are variously involved in responding to homelessness. And I'm not going to describe it any further than that because the breadth of involvement and experience is so vast. I'm going to invite them all to introduce themselves and explain sort of their involvement or experience with homelessness in London. And I'm going to start by introducing the moderator, who is Shelley Yeo.
Hi everyone. Glad to be here. I have been working in the sector, the VAW sector, for about 40 years with mostly women and girls and children in lots of different capacities. I've been involved in some activist moments in the community and beyond, and glad to be here.
My name is Anthea. I started out working in the VAW sector as well, and working with formerly known SACL, Sexual Assault Center London, and then transitioned into the homeless shelter at Atlosa through Jowanong, helping First Nations, Métis, and Inuit and Indigenous women fleeing domestic violence with their children, and then moved into working at the Unity Project with folks who are affected by homelessness, substance use, and so on and so forth. So I've been doing that for over 15 years.
Hi, I'm Julie B. I'm a coordinator and co-founder of Safe Space London. I'm been a community activist in London for over 20 years, basically starting off by squatting a park in London that led to Unity Project. And I've been a peer researcher since 2015.
Hi, I'm my experience pales in comparison to the plethora of experience we have here, but I'm fresh into it. I've been working in the homelessness sector for about 2 years. And then since then, I've founded an outreach team in St. Thomas, Ontario, where we support people who use drugs, people experiencing homelessness, and people experiencing challenges with their mental health, based in peer work. So that's kind of what we do. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Susan McPhail, happy to be here. And I too have worked in the community a long time, particularly around issues of violence, gender-based violence, homelessness, mental health, and largely around social justice issues. And my work blends into my life around activism.
My name is Allison DeBlair. I'm a co-founder of 519 Pursuit alongside my best friend Amber Irvine. We started this journey in 2017. Our organization goes directly to people in London who are rough sleepers, and we try to encourage kind of a better foot forward, whether it be using shelters or services that they've lost trust in, or just finding a better foot forward in the day. And
I think I forgot to say who I was, so I'll do that quickly now. My name is Ryan Craven. I work at the City of London as a community developer, and I've been on the planning committee for the Place Matters conference, of which this is a part. Okay, and I'm going to throw it back to Shelley to start with the moderating the questions.
Okay, so we do have several questions. Our panelists have had an opportunity to look at those questions, and they're really just a guideline for folks. You come from a vast experience in our community and beyond, and so I expect that it's going to be a very robust conversation here. So folks are just going to participate as you have an idea or comments. I may interject if we need to keep the conversation going. So I'm going to start with perhaps just a first general question. In the context of your role or your roles and work, what does place mean or look like to you? And perhaps the folks that you see in your day-to-day.
Safe Space was founded in 2009. It's run by Forum with sex workers and accomplices. We've operated as the only organization in London dedicated to prioritizing the needs of sex workers in London. As a physical place, it's a drop-in center. We're open 6 days a week. But as a place that we all sort of embody in our day-to-day, we're a broader community that really aim to have a community of mutual care where we look out for each other and support each other in day-to-day things beyond like actually accessing the space to pick up your harms or like, you know, whatever you need. It's about building those relationships and those friendships and having someone to like come with you to your doctor's appointment or help you watch your kids or whatever. I always like to share the words of the people who access the space. So I did bring just a couple quotes from people who access the space on what you know, safe space is about. So I've got, like if they're scared to go to the hospital or anything, it's just that beforehand space where they can make decisions or, you know, they can catch up on their thoughts, life and death decisions where they can make life or death choices. So that's one quote. And then another one I've got here is, there's a different kind of relationship. It's friendship. It's not, you know, you're in a position. I don't know what it is, but it's something. But if it's friendship, it's not red tape, you know, you're not getting paid to sit there and talk to me or whatever. So it's a very different sort of dynamic. And I think both of those kind of like really exemplify what safe space is as a place, not just physically, but as like what we carry with us throughout the day.
And Julie, do you think that the sense of what place is has changed for those folks since COVID?
Absolutely. For us, it's been a struggle because we're such a small space and we're mostly volunteer run, getting attacked by a wasp. So because we aren't able to keep, our capacity would technically be so small, we're not able to have our living room sort of vibe like we always do. So much of what we do has been moved outside, unless someone's sort of in a crisis moment. So it's been really a struggle for not just the people who access this space, but those of us who hold the space, figuring out how to like nurture those relationships differently, without having, you know, that time to just like literally kick back and have a nap in the space before we vent about the day and have those kinds of interactions. And then beyond what our space looks like in general, we're seeing like, you know, the numbers of people who access have gone up like massively, and the number of people, like the percentage of people sleeping rough who access has gone up huge. So even more so, it's hard not to have a spot where you can, you know, come and seek refuge from like, you know, the storm or like whatever is actually happening. It's been really, really challenging, really difficult, really hard for us to secure resources that the people who access need, really difficult for more than usual to like secure a home or shelter for someone who accesses. Yeah, it's totally made a huge difference in those of us who hold the space and especially those who access to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so from the perspective of Unity Project, as a direct line worker, I was often on site so in the East Village area. I've definitely felt the loss of our brick and mortar space, because as it acted as a shelter, it was also a drop-in, a refuge for those who sleep rough, who choose to sleep rough, who don't even access our shelter services. So that's been, I've heard from participants as well. It's like, when are you going back? When is that reopening? Because the aspect of having a drop-in space to hand out things, to have just a shelter for even a half an hour has been such a challenge due to COVID, because we transferred into a hotel, which had its pros and cons. So being able to house people in their own space, to have that security, has been a bonus for a lot of folks, but at the same time, it reduces the amount of people that we are seeing for drop-in services, and having other spaces like that in the city closed as well. Especially when your place of home is always moving with you, to have those refuges, to feel part of the community and be able to go into those spaces, it's so important, and not having them is definitely felt.
So some of the folks that you've seen are experiencing some good things from a change of place, but missing out on lots of other pieces, connections. Those folks who don't actually have the housing piece of the place, yeah.
Yeah, because we don't have rooms for everybody, right? So
Mhm.
the ones who are getting rooms, yeah, it's great to be able to lock your stuff up and go back and still have those things. But for others, yeah, we're still having so many people sleeping rough, so many people, because we have reduced numbers in the shelters that are still running as well, right? So it's just difficult to, due to the COVID like regulations, being able to support drop-in scenarios, and it's almost negligible when we're at the hotel.
Yeah.
When I think about that concept that you introduced of place and having a place, I think that's a very privileged concept. So pre-COVID, it had enormous amount of privilege about who gets to have place and what places are accessible to everybody, and who gets to have safe space and place. And now I think COVID has added a hugely increased dimension to that, because all those spaces now have narrowed down and they've been eliminated. And so there's very few place for people to have who would have traditionally a lot of difficulty accessing place and space. And that's what I'm hearing from both Julian and Thea. And I certainly see that as I, walk around communities that I know, and as I talk to people that I used to know and work with. It's particularly for women, for trans people, for people who already have additional vulnerability to violence.
Yeah, we're talking about a population that is and consistently is so resilient, and that when we talk about physical space and place, but also realize that that's community, in the population of those who are affected by homelessness, whether it's situational or chronic, that place often is the people that they engage with, whether it's their hustle, their street family, right? And some of the resilience there was knowing I could go here for a meal there. And you could fill up your days on each day knowing what spaces were available to you, that were curtailed to you, that have been opened up to you. One thing that COVID, I think, has done is really shine the light on on the experiences of the most vulnerable populations, for those who had the privilege of not having to think about it, not being exposed to it. And so it's very visible for everybody, because those spaces, those drop-in spaces, the meals are not there, and feeling that crushing weight of like, where do we go? How do we support these people? I think, as horrible that is, I'm so happy that like it's becoming more visible to those who have the privilege of having both a brick and mortar place and a connection to community, and that stuff is stable for them. So I think it's a really great starting form for us to like look at the things that like people who've been working this field and who are affected by these issues have been speaking about for years, for others to see that, so that, some systemic and policy and procedure can change around that. I don't know, hopefully.
Commenting on that, our team at 519 Pursuit, we do an outreach. So every day, Monday to Friday, our team picks up 50 lunches from the London Food Bank that has them pre-prepared. This started when COVID kind of came into the city and showed the pandemic that it could be, and the changes that were created for our friends that are facing homelessness. We've had so many comments during our outreach, like people would literally come running when they see the vehicles, because if we weren't there for them with that lunch that we took directly to where they were on the sidewalk, they didn't know how they were going to eat that day. And I think that's a huge challenge that also comes along with not having that safe space to walk into, or even having the outlet to go and get clothes or shoes or whatever you might need. The meal is really important, and you can really see the struggle that not having shelters or those places that usually people would go to, where we could fill in, because we're meeting a lot of people that don't just sleep rough anymore that we were usually meeting. We're seeing people who are actually accessing shelter and services and now had to take a step back and kind of find themselves a new path forward.
I've noticed that, at the beginning, there were lots of tent communities. So people were developing their own sense of community and their own places that were different perhaps than where they'd been. Some were much more visible, and some people became invisible in that respect, in terms of that sense of place and those tent communities, or different kinds of communities that came about but seem to have perhaps disappeared.
I'll speak to that. I think it really glaringly shows you how important property value, monetary value is attached to creating a place for yourself, or having ownership over that. Which again ties back to, like, we can look at like land back issues, right? And looking at unceded territory and what it means for us to be built on a colonialistic capitalist society, right? So we're talking about people who have nowhere to go. And those tent cities sprung up out of necessity, out of a desire to support each other because there was nothing else out there for them. And then we find that when those with monetary capital now want to take over those spaces, then all of a sudden these tent cities disappear. And so I think, as even especially the one at the Western Fair, the reason why that large one was broken down was because there was a summer camp that was going to happen the next week. So they didn't want children around Tent City. So I think that besides obviously breaking down a capitalist society, which is, a very large issue, but something that we should be adamant about, we also have to look at attributing value to individuals and people and populations without it being a monetary scenario. So we're placing value on people whether or not they are involved in our capitalist society, as opposed to seeing these people and humans and as valuable human beings in and of itself. So how do we funnel our resources and our interests into creating space for those people to create space for themselves and create place and community without throwing them away? I think that's hard.
I could basically talk about that. Essentially, with our team in St. Thomas, what we have done is we were originally an outreach team going proactively in community with backpacks. And since COVID happened, that wasn't really necessarily a safe practice. We didn't know what we were walking into, so we started up a table. We had to cut back our outreach services and ask people to come to us. We noticed that our own organizational housing instability was really impactful, not only on us, but the people we serve. We noticed that soup kitchens weren't closed down, that evening meals that people who are experiencing homelessness or experiencing, just food insecurity would come seek our services. So specific to asking people to leave because of it being an eyesore, our organization, the Nameless, has really, really been at the seat of that. We have had to move 3 different times in community just to scramble to find a place where we can be there and maintain our support and our services. And so because we've been pushed into the downtown core and pushed in such a vulnerable and very public space, again, we get asked to move because of the people that we serve. And oh, since you moved into the neighborhood, we have people sleeping in the city hall front steps. And it's like, no, that's kind of not what's happening. Your population of people experiencing homelessness is just so public right now because there's nothing for them, because there's no housing, because there's no safe spaces for them. So we've been experiencing that as well. And it's just been super challenging to even just meet people's basic needs on a daily basis for us.
Yeah, to what you're saying, Tish, as you know, safe space, a big part of what sucks a lot of our energy and time and resources and emotional labor is dealing with the lateral violence that we experience from other organizations or the city, or we've got a porta potty there now the landlord's mad at us. It's almost one of the biggest barriers to safe space in our day-to-day. Every week it's something, and it's similar, it's very reflective of the people who access the space. It's those who are holding it, similar to the Nameless. It's we're actually just really holding on and fighting to have our physical space, right?
Yeah, and it's so frustrating, and that like breaks down barriers, and it creates barriers for people to even again meet their basic needs. And we're talking about food and connection and harm reduction and community. People belong, and we need to carve out spaces, and that's what we're doing. We're taking any little dark corner that we can and brightening it up with the people that we serve, because they are incredible, resilient, like beautiful people, and we're just there being like, see these people, right? Let's help us. Our city in St. Thomas has nothing. We are so far behind in services and housing. We have a 0.7% vacancy rate. You can't house people with that. So we're just like holding on to these spaces and encroaching into, you know, the city hall property, and we're just like, we're going to squat here for the time being because we don't have a space that we are allowed to access. And again, that goes back to barriers. Yeah, like people aren't allowed to access spaces because you have to fit this criteria, and it's just really frustrating. So yeah.
Although we don't have a physical space, we're directly in the streets meeting folks. So we're actually going to their spaces, the spaces that they make for themselves, where they feel comfortable. And it's definitely a challenge because of the businesses and services downtown that are now trying to build themselves back up since COVID. Our friends are definitely facing challenges from going from having nobody downtown to now everybody's back. So it's definitely trying to find those places where they can be, where they can, you know, think about their day, where they're going to start, where they're going to go, what they're going to do, and how they're going to keep their belongings.
Have you found any of you, I mean, this is what I have noticed, that some people have disappeared. And it's very concerning. So they've disappeared, and some of that is, I'm sure, for safety reasons. They just don't feel safe and feel too visible. And some folks have just disappeared, and we're not hearing from them, and we don't know what's happening. Has that been a concern for any of you out there on doing the work?
I mean, I guess I could speak to that. The populations that I mainly serve are fairly transient, and so it's hard to connect with people who were used to doing a drop-in if they didn't stay in shelter and have someone look into them or like look out for them. I mean, basically we rely on the sense of community within that community to keep each other safe as best as they can. And again, it goes back to place. You know, where are those folks being able to access and be visible and be seen? So a transient population is it's a struggle to keep six on each other. I mean, we're struggling.
So there are lots of barriers that have been created because of COVID. There were already tons of barriers for folks who needed a place to call their own, or safe places to go to, or that sense of community. Do you think that there's been any improvements in quality of life or any improvements for communities and individuals in the last few months?
I'll speak to that. I think from the perspective of working at shelter and, you know, some of the financial supports that the Canadian government has put out in order to do rent subsidies that are for an elongated time. So there's the COB right now, which is guaranteed till 2029, which is an amazing thing because we all know right now that like affordable living is non-existent. And I mean, that's an epidemic and pandemic in and of itself. So, I mean, that is an added benefit, but you also have to jump through the hoops and cross the barriers to be able to qualify for that or have the resources for the people to help you apply for those things. So, I mean, there are always a portion of the population who benefit from the highlight of social issues happening. But yeah, again, it also highlights the gaps in services as well. So there are people out there who are not connected to any kind of housing stability program, so therefore don't qualify for any of those programs and may be a lower acuity and would have successfully being rehoused, right? I think it's also us looking at what housing first programs really mean and what it means to actually have space and place and agency and community. And I think that we have to take a more holistic approach when we're talking about this. and not just be like, we have to solve homelessness, like looking at what homelessness is and how it is integrated with a multitude of other social issues and is contingent on social location as well. So to go back to what you were talking about, losing people, as well as within the Indigenous community going in and off reserve, we lose people that way. So like Tish was saying, yeah, we definitely rely on the community itself to look back for and look out for other people that we're losing along the way, because so many systems are non-existent to keep tabs.
I'll also speak to quality of life and whether or not that has improved. Basically, in St. Thomas, quality of life of our participants has plummeted as the toxic street supply still wreaks havoc on the city. There's still no housing. The shelter remained in regular operations because capacity was the gatekeeper to move people into hotels that were actually readily available, but the city denied that as an actual option. The city did offer a bit of dignity with increase of portable toilets, but didn't listen or consider any feedback of the people who would be accessing those porta potties. So they immediately took them away. Well, within, a month, they took it away. And now we have people using the streets, which are the only option for them, as public toilets. And again, if it would have been it would have been a 5-minute conversation with a frontline worker or a participant of a frontline, a drop-in service, to say, hey, I know that you might be accessing these porta potties. Where can we put them? What can we have in them? How can we make it better for you? So basically that's how that's been happening. London, I can talk a little bit about how the increase of safe supply has been promoted and provided to people, which is incredible. And that's really, really proactive and beneficial to many folks. Also, with the barriers being decreased for methadone access has been really, really great. Housing First is actually like working together right now, that I've personally noticed, and systems and organizations are talking to each other and making it cohesive, and it's actually working. So I've seen some benefits, but like on a majority, we've observed directly that the programs dedicated to people experiencing homelessness, poverty, racial profiling, and all these harms associated with this are easily swept away. We are the first ones to hit this brick wall of no more services, because our people don't complain. Our people they're just like, all right, until we have the ability to amplify those voices and say, no, sorry, what you're doing is wrong. We need to support people. They're the people who are having their services ripped away. They're the targets. They're not going to say anything. So no, quality of life has actually plummeted. People are dying faster, and it's been an absolute disaster, actually. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, there aren't a lot of positives, maybe for some individuals, but the current plan right now is is to house people in motels and hotels. I'm not sure how long that's lasting. Perhaps some of you will know that. There are some food security programs that are happening that are quite great, but there are lots of food security programs that had to shut down. So, I'm not sure if it's meeting the need. But when someone decides that COVID is over, or this crisis is over in our community, what do you think needs to happen, or what do you think, what are your concerns about what's going to happen? And have we started in our community to talk about recovery? Or is it too soon to talk about recovery?
I don't think it's too soon to talk about recovery. And I think from someone who's been involved for a long time, some of the solutions that we've seen put into place now are things that were strongly recommended 5 and 10 years ago, that some of us work diligently with the city and other providers to try and think outside the box and do things that don't cost that much money, but could actually save lives and make a huge difference. And a lot of those solutions, most of them, did not come from those of us delivering services. They came from people who are experiencing the particular conditions. So I don't know if there's an emergency task force now set up in the city. Those of you would know better. But I would really want to know, where are the voices of the people who are living the experiences, the voices from those communities who actually have the wisdom and knowledge and know what kinds of solutions would better suit them. So we need short-term, immediate, and we really need some long-term. Simple things like, for example, making the library once again more accessible, removing security guards and instead having peer supports. I think peer supports are a huge factor. I don't know why we don't have teams of peer supports feet on the street right now, well-trained, well-supported, because we know so many folks from communities who have so much expertise. So there are so many solutions that we need in place immediately, and that we really need to be looking ahead as COVID hopefully eases off and we pick up lives and we don't miss these opportunities that we actually have in this moment to really make a difference and to examine those systems of structural and systemic violence and make some I just really like to piggyback on what you had said, Susan, regarding not sure why we don't have teams of peer-based places out on the street. I mean, we are, but we are laughed at. We are ignored intentionally, and our feedback is like hardly ever taken seriously. We are just a bunch of angry women who have no idea what they're talking about. And clearly a suit in a boardroom is far better and has clearly navigated the harmful barriers and the harmful systems that exist. They're prioritizing suits over boots, and that's totally harmful, and nothing is working. And we need to actually physically take into consideration the words and the experiences of people who have been through these systems to say, what do you need? What is your goal? How can we help you get there? Instead of mandating these barriers, saying you need to do this, this, and this for us to have you in our program. We have to ask, we have to consider how do we get there, and who has been there, who has navigated it, and how can we better it for you? And be inclusive of peers and people with lived experience. It is an absolute mandatory thing that we need to have on panels. And if you're a person of privilege and who has, gone through school and sits in these panels, you need to say, no, I need to have somebody with lived experience or a grassroots peer-based organization with me at this table before we make any decisions or any policies moving forward. And that's it. We try to sit at these tables, but we are ignored. It's frustrating.
And we have a similar experience at Safe Space, as you know. It's like when we do get invited to be or force our way into being at this collaborative table, it's not a collaborative table if everybody at the same table isn't getting, the same compensation. For decades now, we see the people who have power, the people who are in whatever industry, just using those of us that have the lived experience, doing this work, developing these programs, which does need to happen. If we're moving forward with city development, with creating new services, new programs, whatever, they absolutely need to be, those frameworks need to be created by the people who access them, by the people who are in need, like everyone, create a, do this, new thing in the city and then be surprised that there's a whole bunch of people sleeping rough there. Well, yeah, because that was a population just blatantly left out of this. So we do need to, there are many organizations in our city, sex work organizations, BIPOC organizations, grassroots organizations doing this work. And we need to be included in creating these new frameworks and creating these new developments. There's things that have worked really well in similar cities to our size, but it doesn't seem like the people who have the power and the decision making possibly care to look into that. And it's really frustrating when day to day we're doing this fight. It's really frustrating when, traditionally throughout history, when there's thing, you know, war, whatever in this situation, our pandemic, it's like sex workers step up and are the ones who have often taken care of community. And here we are again, Safe Spaces doing 6 meals a week with what resources and how. We're just making it happen. Meanwhile, I see on the meal calendar, you know, a real well-funded organization just canceled all their meals for September. Like, how is this happening? How is this on our backs all the time? And it's work I feel like we're just expected to do, and we keep doing it because we can't live with ourselves, like leaving the people we love in the dust. But where is like the happy medium? Yeah, like it's really challenging. So, you know, call to action. Listen for a bit, you know, be open to learning, try, make mistakes, do the best. You've got power. Like if you're accessing the Wi-Fi right now and you're on here and you can see this, you have some power. Figure out how you can use it and use it, you know, little small, you know, Jody Hall, who is like our research coordinator at Safe Space. It's like, she's just one person who had this little bit of, power being able to do a research project, and she came and truly worked with us, committed to the space, committed to these relationships, not just, oh, I'm in and out, I want to use you for this information, and really change the discourse of where we were able to move. She made all the like a world of difference. So like, listen to what these organizations are saying, share, donate, do what you can, pressure municipal, provincial, and federal governments to help support these different organizations. You know, we need safe supply. We need to decriminalize sex work. We need to decriminalize drugs. We need new housing developments to, you know, have mandatory low income housing. Like we need to not just place a whole bunch of people in who fit these things in this community or that community. We need to diversify our city, and we need to actually be inclusive.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And so those are very specific, good suggestions. I know that when we've done this in the past, people come away asking for very specific examples. They want to know, because we can talk about all of the barriers, we can talk about maybe some of the good things that have come, but lots of us have been excluded from the conversation. Lots of us who actually appear to have a voice have been excluded from the conversation. And the folks most importantly are, you know, the ones who have the experience of homelessness and lack of food security and so on, haven't had that space at all or been invited. So what specific suggestions do you have? Because I don't want to ask this too late. Sometimes it's so late that we're all really rushed. But what specific suggestions do you have that just the, you know, a regular person perhaps watching this or we could be talking to can do? We know that they can contribute to some of your programs for food and those kinds of things. What do they say to government? So some people don't even know the level of governments that they can talk to or who they would send. I've had to give very specific information about who to talk to in the government. So maybe if you could speak to some of those suggestions as well and give some specific examples that might be helpful. So it is a call to action. And Susan, I know that you and I had talked a while ago about our call to action that we had for all our sisters, which is a few years old, but it's still relevant. So maybe if you could speak to some of those things.
I was thinking about how in 2011 and 2014, we had the first national conferences on women and homelessness here in London, Ontario. And what percentage of people attended who are lived experience? That was our mandate, was that the mandate was to hear the voices of people of lived experience. So it was a very high percentage, as well as a lot of policymakers. But when I think about what could happen, again, I don't know if there's a task force. Maybe someone can answer me. I believe there's a COVID emergency task force, and who here sits on it or has some connection to it. So Allison, you sit on it, so that's really good. So it seems to me that it could be like a point plan around specifically the kinds of issues that have come up here and how resources are shared more, to your point, Julie, collaboratively, and how those voices of lived experience can be located within a task force around some very immediate suggestions. And then the longer term obviously looks at things like guaranteed minimum wage and the continuum of housing, because not everyone wants to live in a house. Not everyone wants to, you know, many women, home is the least safe place for a woman in Canada. So we really have to think it much differently about how people have shelter and what that means to them. But sometimes I wonder if we need to create like neighborhood coalitions. You know, I think about just the little neighborhood that I live in and who is our council person and what kinds of messages could we be delivering to them to be putting pressure all the way along to the mayor and to council to create the kinds of changes in safe neighborhoods and welcoming and friendly and accessible neighborhoods. In our neighborhood, we've seen a real increase of individuals who are not finding space or place anywhere. And that's met with a lot of different reaction, from fear. Some of my neighbors are very fearful, to welcoming and bringing food out. And we live on the edge of woods where people are camping, to, you know, taking food and welcoming people into the woods. So I wonder if we can just, you know, what did Margaret Mead say? Like start small, like think large, but start where you are. That would be one very immediate thing that I would think about.
I was just going to speak to the issue of that, like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, but we really do have to shine a light on those voices that have not been given the light and the magnitude. So speaking of like BIPOC, QDPOC, Indigenous, Two-Spirit folks who are at an increased disadvantage to accessing any of these support services that we're talking about in general anyway. And I think one of those specific things is that whether it's a task force, whether or not, it's that there is a disconnect between city initiatives and those grassroots agencies that are serving the most vulnerable populations, those who live on multiple margins. And so those agencies are out there, they're grassroots, and already have these demands and already have these policies and calls to action as to how to do these things. For example, looking at Black Lives Matter and looking at defunding police, these are already structural step-by-step guides on what can be done with funding from the government, whether it be municipal, whether it be provincial or federal, right? And how that needs to have a rotating scenario, because even being in the city for as long as I have, watching funding going to the similar agencies, right? And when those agencies aren't shifting their space. So as like a trans non-binary person of color, coming from an aspect of how do I access shelters, knowing that my very existence is not seen in those shelters. Even with the new YOU shelter, they're supposedly trans inclusive, but don't acknowledge the fact that there are folks who are non-binary. Where do they fit? This wing is still gendered. You're basically erasing me. So, right, that is recognizing that these folks and these individuals require a space and existence in that space. So looking at Black Queer Network or looking at queer events and what are their demands, what are they showcasing to you are gaps in services for their most vulnerable populations, and using that to infer and then and change where funding is going to, you know? Yeah, I don't know if that answers. Go ahead, Tish.
Okay, thanks, Anthea. No, you're so right. I mean, everything you said is bang on. What I would increase or include to the conversation as to like, what can an individual do? I mean, there are many items that a community member can do, such as advocate for safe supply, support grassroots organizations to be successful, and watch where your money is going. Pay attention to the organizations that you're donating to and watch them closely. Support them as much as you can, which is the grassroots organizations on social media. That sometimes that is our only platform to get our words out, get our requests out, because again, we're not invited to tables. Neighborhood coalitions won't do anything. I mean, the NIMBYism in my neighborhood alone wouldn't even hear me out for a second. You can also ask the city to increase the numbers of municipally owned housing options and seek input from those who are currently living there to expand on what to improve. Supporting local small businesses and not corporate giants that don't do anything for your community. Ask for a universal basic income. We have CERB right now. Let's expand that. Let's continue that. The people's lives that I've observed directly have been impacted in sort of a very positive and a very, very negative way. So we just need to balance that a little bit, but continue that service. You can also ask for increase in mental health dollars and going to prevention pieces to address the root of adverse childhood experiences. I mean, there's a lot of things that community members can do. They just need to pay a little bit more attention or understand who in your community is acting during COVID. Support those people, because I mean, you know, there are grassroots organizations that have been working tirelessly, like Safe Space, this entire time, expanding their mandates on a shoestring budget and just getting out there and doing the work, because we care about the people. We care about their lives and how they impact our lives and how we impact theirs. It's like, we can't just drop what we're doing. So support community initiatives to build a stronger, more connected relationship with your community members who are being left out.
So we do have a plan for ending homelessness or solving, it's called Solving Homelessness in London. It's been a plan that's been around for, more years than I can count. And I think that probably the COVID crisis has changed that plan and actually moved some things forward fairly quickly, which was a real surprise. But how do you think that we or anybody in the community can contribute to that plan? Because I don't know that it's been open, or if it has, we don't know. When I say we, I mean the general community doesn't know how to give input. And then how do we hold our city accountable to that plan, to knowing what it is, and then holding them accountable and hoping and sharing that folks in our community care?
I can speak on this. I think that perspectives have to be changed first. So before we can go to the government or to the mayor or to city council, we have to be able to also be activists in our own self by understanding homelessness in our community and understanding the resources and how we individually can be a resource for somebody who we're walking by in the community without reaching in our pocket and getting a monetary donation or dropping change or dropping food at their feet. I think it's more conversation and friendship and being that person that's in the community that's welcome to speaking to others, especially right now with COVID. We're wearing masks, we're not talking, we're not out in networks of people. I think it's important to remember those who are sleeping rough and who are using shelters. They're going to get left behind if we don't, as a community and as a society, pick them up ourselves first and then look to the government. I think we're going to have a great big issue because we're all going to just start falling. I think that on the topic of how we support them through COVID or how we have an exit plan with COVID, it's definitely asking our friends more what they need rather than going from a textbook. I know the city has spent a lot of money in the last couple of years trying to educate and trying to bring shelters and services and people working directly with these folks to teach them what could be happening in the community rather than asking them to go in the community and speak to these folks. We're still getting researchers and professors to come and teach us things that we already know because we're sitting and listening to these people come into our offices or come sit in front of us and explain what's going on. I think we can't have a generalized plan for homelessness. I think we need to look at steps and what type of profiles are met. With the response to the COVID and the hotels and services, we've been doing outreach and we've been directly in the streets, and people are being affected by seeing their friends being housed in a hotel because they fit the description, but yet this other person who has seizures all night and is slamming their head off a sidewalk and now covered in, blood and bruising, and there's nobody around, they're not good enough to have that housing. So how do we make sure that everybody knows that you're all worth being in our community, and how do we offer them a plan rather than saying you have to be fitting this description for us to speak to you?
So the task force that we referred to earlier ended abruptly in May, just in one meeting, end of meeting, well, that's it. And so I And to be honest, it was nice to connect us, but there wasn't anything super productive happening from it. I do want to think about the end of COVID, but right now we're terrified about to go into what we think might be the second wave.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like there's got to be some way that we can work to figure out, to be realistic about that and see what resources are needed now, so we don't have something similar to when the pandemic started.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm just wondering, the end of homelessness plan you referred to, Shelley, is it accessible?
Yes.
Like, can we link that after?
Sure. Yeah, it's accessible. It's on the City of London website.
Yeah.
Okay.
They update it every few years, but it's been problematic how that, I can speak to how problematic that has been for the last few years. So I can recall attempting to give input or attempting to have voices of lived experience give input, and that homelessness plan would quietly off to the side be updated and then released without participation. Shelley, you probably can speak more to that. I think that's changed, but it was very problematic.
Yeah, we were at some original meetings too, I think, and it was, it did seem problematic, but that was like 10 years ago, so I don't know what's developed in between now and then.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's been a fresh start, but then COVID probably changed everything. And again, who do we want at that table? Who do we as a community want at that table? And how do we express those concerns to the folks who are organizing that? And I think the last few months have proven to us that we can, as a community, do some pretty good work together. And so how do we continue those things so that it doesn't just stop? Mm-hmm. So we've got about 15 minutes or so. Is there anything in particular that you wanted to talk about today that hasn't come up? Susan?
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious because I'm not at these tables anymore. I was for some years, but so is there not a coordinating table, or is there any body of people that come together that try to plan right now and share resources during this time of COVID?
I'm pretty sure the homeless diversion team at the city engages with EDs and managers of a bunch of different homeless services. I'm not familiar with how many people with lived experience are actually informing those that agency, because they are the people who are deciding who goes into hotels and who is assigned to housing stability programs. And all those housing stability programs usually coincide with a rental subsidy. So that affords individuals the monetary ability to rent in private market at the rates that they're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Susan.
I wanted to mention that a few years ago, some of us were involved in a project, Homes for Women, where we took the Housing First model, which some of us had a critique about, especially in terms of its gender-specific lack of analysis, I guess, for want of a better word. And one of the things that we found was just the relationship between the child welfare system and being able to safely offer choices to women identifying women who were parenting children. That this was very, very problematic, and much to our interest and surprise, although I guess we could have guessed this, is that when a woman is involved with child welfare, her risk of homelessness and all the intersectionality that goes with that around mental health and substance use and violence, etc., substantially increases, and that when her child is apprehended, her ability to maintain any kind of stability just flatlines. And so I think there's a real relationship there and an opportunity there, because the child welfare system was established, over 100 years ago. It's very military-like, it's very penalizing, particularly to Indigenous communities. It's actually a form of genocide for BIPOC communities. And so again, I'm not at these tables, but I think that there's an opportunity and a relationship to how this all plays itself out. Obviously more so in COVID, but if we look down into the future, it's a place to, I think, that needs a lot of work.
Any other thoughts? Yes, Tish.
So basically what I was just going to say is like, as a community funded organization, we have shown that the community has quite a lot of power and ability and resiliency and ability to see people. And I think that we oftentimes look towards the people in perceived power when the community is actually the one who is able to roll out these programs and be persistent and just do the work. I mean, I think that it's important to come at this issue as a community, and not as someone who works at this role or is in this position. I mean, I think we need to continue to ask people with lived experience, people who support those people with lived experience, and you know, champion the voices of people who are doing the work, and having these task force and tables that essentially waste our time, who don't listen to us, disseminated, and we'll figure it out, and we'll just, you know, propose ideas as a community that we can actually do, that we have done, and we need to continue to support those voices through that action.
With 509 Pursuit, like, we built it completely online from the community supporting us. So we started as like a donation program. And through that, we've been able to support over almost 8,000 care packages. So that's the power of community, because we've never had funding. We've never ran off anything. And we're going into our 3rd to 4th year. Like, the power of community is so important. And I think the more that we can offer solutions where the community can help in a meaningful way, rather than just donating money or items that are needed, I think that would be a good push to changing the reality for our friends who are facing homelessness. I think that the integration to society has to come hand in hand with the housing first. I think integration is really a big part of it, understanding where you are, where you live, and what is there for you, rather than just being somebody who is there, who is looked past daily, and who doesn't even know, you know, what's going on, what day it is, why is the community doing this and that. I think it's important to really encourage the involvement of them with our lives, so that they can see life after homelessness.
Or some folks will have other choices as well. Julie, you're also working with another grassroots organization where the power of community has made a huge difference. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah, for sure. So Safe Space was solely funded and ran by community donations and by volunteers for the first 10 years of our existence. Literally just paid our rent by $5 e-transfer donations, $20 e-transfer donations, whatever people could spare. We have the most beautiful, resilient community who really truly looks out for each other. I mean, in the peak of the beginning of this pandemic, when we were making like really difficult choices, like one day I had a can of soup and a Mr. Noodle, and someone came and they were hungry. I'm like, do I give them both, or do I give them one and hold the other for someone else who comes next, which is like, you know, barely enough food? And I gave them one, and 5 minutes later someone else came, and then someone else came, and we had nothing. Like, it was horrible. And we put a call to food, and we had people like, you know, a mother zip over with her kids on a bike, giving what they could take from their pantry. Another woman who came and just like gave what she could spare from what she had picked up from the food bank. Like, literally, you can make a difference. And that day, those little bits that came to us made up filled our table, and we were able to continue giving out food again. And I'm saying, like, at this point, people were so hungry. People were ripping open packages and like eating them as we were like, you know, continuing to support the other needs. Like, it was so such a desperate time. And like, again and again, we're surprised and have so much gratitude, and we're so grateful for our community that really lifts us up, because truly without the donations of our community, we couldn't pay our rent, we couldn't keep our doors open, we couldn't pay our utilities. Like, we would be just screwed. So yeah, community is everything. And beyond, you know, helping us in the ways they do by showing up, donating, holding the space, it's pushing larger funders and people with decision-making power in our city to include, you know, as I said, sex work organizations, BIPOC organizations, grassroots organizations in the decision-making, and the people who have lived and living experience. And not just, oh yeah, we want your opinion, we want to include you, but compensate everybody who's involved. I'm sick of sitting at a table where I'm the only one who's not being paid, you know? And like, we're an organization who literally last week, we could not house someone because she had 3 weeks left, and she came in, and I'm telling you, like, this is someone who was brutally beat by a partner, whose life was at risk. What did we do? Like, we all threw in $5 and we housed her in a hotel room for as long as we needed to. And this is the thing, like, that's community. Like, it's absolutely essential. And when you take something out of their community, when you don't allow people to have those gathering spaces to support each other, then that's a literal lifeline. So
yeah, thanks. And we've witnessed that. Our community has witnessed everything that you've both done and been recognized for too, I think. Tish, how long has your organization been operating, or how long have you been doing this, and how long have you been funded for it? I didn't realize that you were getting city funding.
We're not getting city funding. The city does not support us in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
So we've been doing this outreach team. It kind of grew. So I noticed that there was some really harmful discussion throughout the community about people who use drugs. And then I looked into it, and I saw there was like really nothing for people using drugs in St. Thomas. So then I started as an initial cleanup team of volunteers, of community members who cared about their neighbor, to go into community proactively and clean up sharps. We taught a lot of people how to properly and safely dispose of sharps. From there, it kind of stemmed into this outreach team of people, of community members of all different sorts of careers and or no career, and just any ability, whoever wanted to support it kind of just came together and supported it, whatever it was. We made it what it is now. So we've been in the community for about 2 years now. We've been doing outreach for a year and a half, solely and 100% based on community donations, community funding, volunteer hours pulled in from the community of people who see what we're doing and who are like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can do that too. And varying different degrees of mobility and ability, and just basically people who are able to come together and support people, which are the people we serve. So we've been doing that for a little while now, and yeah, we've been able to come to this space where we operate a static table location, and we have now been reintroducing outreach with our backpacks. But yeah, basically started out as a cleanup team, and it's grown into this really lovely community funded organization.
That's great. For our last few minutes, could we have like a final comment from each panelist? Anthea.
Yeah, so I think where I'm coming from is making things as accessible as possible. So breaking down those barriers and for services. It's something as simple as allowing community organizations that are around food be able to support community members who are having food scarcity. I mean, that's in and of itself can be one of the biggest barriers as well. We have all these people here with struggling businesses, but they're not allowed to feed people, you know? So I think integrating that and allowing the most vulnerable of our populations be participating members of our community, be seen and heard, and in all the best ways. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks. And Allison?
I just think that we as a community and society can all do a little better by just understanding that it's not one easy path to getting back housed and back on your feet through homelessness. The more that we can look to our community and understand what's going on and why these homeless folks are still homeless after 10 years, or they're still in the community, and not labeling it, and otherwise talking to these people and understanding and seeing if there's some way that we can help or some way that we can look up on our phones. Most of us are walking around with a phone with internet connected that we can Google, say, a meal calendar, or if a shelter's open, and try to make a phone call to see if there's a bed. Because a lot of our friends don't have phones and they have to walk everywhere and they don't have kind of the access. I think that together, the more we change the perspective on homelessness and understand those in our community, the more that we'll be kind of pushed to help out and be that person in the community that's involved in the whole plan to not only getting rid of homelessness, but like supporting it and integrating it into our community, into our day-to-day things, and into our parks.
Great. Julie?
I would thank you all for sharing like your time. It was really nice to share this space. And I guess leaving off, I just want to, again, like, you know, think critically. Just because that's the way something is doesn't mean that it's working, you know. Mm-hmm. Notice who is not at the table and think about why that may be and what may make something more accessible for whoever's missing. And, you know, again, like, you've got a little bit of power, figure out how to use it. And lastly, like, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's not always easy doing what needs to get done. You know, sometimes I feel like a lot of the time I've gotten like scolded emails or whatever for reaching out, you know, like, this is something that needs to get done. This is something we need, like, you know, and I guess it's just, in those uncomfortable moments, it's like, okay, you know, are you trying to have, you know, this really like, glossed over relationship, like, oh yeah, we're like friends, or do you want to get shit done, and do you want to do what needs to get done? And if so, you know, just power through and do it. Sometimes it is a little bit uncomfortable, but I feel like, you know, you'll sleep better at night. So do what you got to do, even if it takes you out of your comfort zone.
Thanks. Susan?
I feel like everyone should call their council person and find out what's happening in our community right now to create more safety, inclusivity, and welcoming in spaces for individuals who are experiencing a lot more marginalization and vulnerability as a result of COVID. And do some kind of neighborhood drive around that. Like, citizenry is our citizenship. Each and every one of us is what will push change. So, anyways, that's my closing thought.
Thanks, Susan. And Tish?
My closing thought would be invite them and pay her.
That's very great.
Oh, one more thing. If you don't have an naloxone kit, get an naloxone kit.
Yes, thank you. It's free.
Yeah. Yes,
and
it is.
We'll also walk around with water and granola bars. And also the other thing, like, go talk to people. When you see folks on the street or on the corners, or just like, go talk to folks and say, hey, what's happening? How's today going for you? And what do you need? Mm-hmm. Like, don't be afraid.
Also, if there's voices that you feel you aren't hearing, if there's voices that you feel you're not hearing, do that research, because most likely they are speaking up and you just don't have exposure to them. So do that research, do that legwork to find the communities that you don't know about and learn from them.
Mm-hmm. One of the things suggested to carry around is not only water, and which is really important because there are so few places for folks to access water now, where they used to be, and washrooms and that kind of thing, but also cigarettes for some folks, sometimes cash, and and a little bit of food as you're walking around as well. And probably a friendly word, I think, probably makes a huge difference for folks. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, for giving your time, your expertise, your heartfelt comments and suggestions for our community, for individuals. I know that sometimes just one simple act with one person can make a huge difference. And if we all did that, I think it would probably hugely make a difference in our community. So thank you so much for sharing and caring.
Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's experience and work that you're doing. Thank you very much.
So much. Mm-hmm.